We are going to get right into a single, massive historical event today, the First Crusade. Specifically, that incredible and honestly pretty brutal journey that led to the Siege of Jerusalem in 1099.
It's just such a defining moment of the medieval period, and it really all kicks off in the late 11th century. The official start, if you want to call it that, was a request for help from the Byzantine Emperor.
Alexios Komnenos, right? He needed help fighting the Seljuk Turks.
Exactly. But that was just the spark. The real fire, the thing that got tens of thousands of people moving, was Pope Urban II's speech in 1095. He didn't just ask for soldiers, he framed this whole thing as a holy mission.
So you have these dual motivations driving everyone.
Powerfully dual, yeah. On one hand, it was absolutely seen as a religious duty, a pilgrimage, but with weapons, to go and protect Christian holy sites.
But there was more to it than just that.
Oh, definitely. If you look a little closer, it was also hugely economic. I mean, Europe was crowded. If you were a younger son or a knight without any land, your options were pretty limited. So the idea of gaining land or wealth or even just status out in the East, that was a massive, very practical reason to go.
And we have to be clear, this wasn't some professional army. This was more like a mass migration.
It was. And the logistics are just mind-boggling. We're talking about people traveling thousands of miles, most of them on foot, across entire continents.
Dealing with hunger, disease, local attacks.
All of it. Their first major goal was just to get to Constantinople. That city was this gigantic meeting point, the staging area where all these different groups, French, German, Italian, had to somehow coordinate before heading into the real danger zone.
And once they left the, relative safety of the Byzantine Empire, that's when the real test began, crossing Anatolia.
Yes. And you're talking about an army from temperate Europe suddenly having to march across these huge, dry, incredibly hot plains.
The climate shock must have been just devastating.
Immediate and devastating. You've got soldiers in heavy chainmail, used to damp, cool weather, now facing just scorching heat. It wasn't just tiring, it was psychologically crushing.
And they're deep in enemy territory now, facing Seljuk Turks who knew the land.
And who used these hit-and-run tactics with light cavalry that the slower, heavily armed crusaders just couldn't counter effectively.
But the environment itself was maybe the bigger enemy.
It was a more effective killer than the Turks, for sure. Water was unbelievably scarce. Dehydration was a constant threat, not just for the men, but for all the horses and animals. It just coaled their ranks and showed everyone just how hard this was going to be.
So crossing Anatolia was this brutal lesson that faith alone wasn't enough. They needed strategy, they needed logistics.
Which brings them to their next huge problem, a strategic city that became the real test of their will to go on, Antioch.
The Siege of Antioch. This starts in October 1097, and it wasn't a quick fight?
No, not at all. It dragged on for 8 agonizing months. The city was a true fortress. It had these incredibly thick, high walls, and a lot of them were built on steep hillsides, which made a direct attack almost impossible.
8 months. I can't even imagine. What were they doing for food?
It became a genuine survival crisis, especially during that cold, wet winter. The historical accounts are clear food just ran out completely. Soldiers were eating roots, weeds, whatever they could find.
And then the horses?
Then they started eating their horses, the very animals they needed to fight. The famine was so bad that just surviving day to day became the new mission.
That kind of pressure had to be causing fights among the leaders.
Absolutely. The main commanders, people like Raymond of Saint-Gilles and Bohemond of Taranto, they were constantly arguing over who was in charge and, more importantly, who would get to rule Antioch if they ever took it. Morale just hit rock bottom.
But they do get a breakthrough. After all that despair, something finally goes their way.
It does. A secret deal. Bohemond apparently made contact with a guard on one of the towers, an Armenian man named Firuz.
And he let them in.
He let a small group climb the walls at night. Once they were inside, they fought their way to a gate, opened it up, and the main army just poured in. The city fell in June 1098.
What a relief that must have been. But it didn't last long.
Not even a little. Just days after they take Antioch, a massive Muslim relief army shows up. Suddenly, the Crusaders are the ones who are trapped, besieged inside the city they just captured.
So they had to fight their way out.
They had to fight another huge, desperate battle just to hold on to what they just won. It's just unbelievable.
It really is. So after all that, they finally start moving towards their main goal, towards Jerusalem, in early 1099. But they changed their strategy.
They do. They learned their lesson. They couldn't afford another Antioch, so instead of marching inland, they stick to the Mediterranean coast.
For supplies.
Exactly. This let them get resupplied by Genoese and peasant ships. It was a brilliant logistical move that guaranteed them food and equipment.
And a lot of the smaller cities along the coast, they didn't really want to fight.
No, many just surrendered or paid them money to leave them alone. It was just easier than facing a siege. So the final march was tough, but much more straightforward.
You can just feel the excitement building. Even though the march is slow, hot, dusty, they're getting closer.
And then, in June of 1099, they finally see it. The stone walls of Jerusalem in the distance, after all that time, all that suffering. But the army that sees it is a shadow of what it was. They're down to maybe, 12,000 fighting men left?
And the city's defenders, the Fatimids from Egypt, they were ready for them. They had their own strategy.
A very clever one. Water warfare. They had poisoned or filled in all the wells outside the city walls.
Oh, that's brutal.
It is. It meant the Crusaders had to haul every drop of water they needed from miles away, under that intense summer sun.
So they're exhausted before the siege even really begins.
Right. So to keep spirits up, the religious leaders held these big processions, marching around the city walls, praying. But, prayer doesn't knock down stone walls. They needed siege engines.
Which means they needed wood. Lots of it. And Jerusalem is not exactly surrounded by forests.
Not at all. They had to get creative. They found a hidden forest miles to the north. And they also, this is amazing, they completely dismantled some of their own supply ships that had arrived at the coast.
Just for the timber.
Just for the timber. And then skilled craftsmen got to work building the war machines.
What exactly were they building?
Two main things. Catapults to throw huge stones and keep the defenders' heads down. And the main event, two gigantic wooden siege towers, several stories high.
And they had to protect those from fire.
Yes. So they covered them in raw, wet animal hides. It was a massive undertaking. And then they had to slowly, painstakingly roll these things into position.
So the final attack starts on the night of July 13th, 1099.
And it was a smart attack. They hit two different sides of the city at once, the north and south walls, to try and split the defense.
And the defenders are fighting back with everything they have. Fire, stones.
It's a race. The Crusaders are trying to get their towers to the wall before they get burned to the ground, and their own catapults are firing nonstop to give them cover.
The big moment, the breakthrough, comes on the second day, and it's led by a knight named Godfrey of Bouillon.
That's right. Godfrey, on the northern wall, he manages to get his tower right up against the stone rampart. Just perfectly positioned.
Close enough to get a bridge across.
Exactly. His men drop a heavy wooden bridge from the top of the tower right onto the wall. That creates the breach.
The first soldiers scramble across, fight their way down to a gate.
They break the locks, swing open the heavy doors, and that's it. The siege is over. Thousands of soldiers pour into the city.
And what comes next is, it's one of the darkest parts of the story, a period of just terrible violence.
It's important to be direct about what the historical records say, and they describe an extreme level of violence. The Crusaders, after years of hardship and loss, didn't really distinguish between soldiers and civilians. There was immense suffering, and a huge amount of wealth was seized. It's often seen as a very dark moment in history.
After the fighting stops, they have to figure out what to do with the city. They have to govern it.
Right. They established the Kingdom of Jerusalem. It's basically a European feudal system dropped into the Middle East.
And Godfrey Bouillon is chosen as the first leader.
He is, but he famously refuses to be called a king. He says he won't wear a crown of gold where Christ wore a crown of thorns, so he takes the title Defender of the Holy Sepulchre.
And that kingdom lasts for almost 100 years. What was the long-term impact of all this back in Europe?
Well, the success of the First Crusade just opened up contact between Europe and the Middle East on a huge scale. Trade exploded. Europeans were introduced to new spices, foods, textiles, new technologies.
So on one hand, you have this economic and cultural boom.
Yes, but it's born from this incredible conflict. The other, and maybe more important legacy, is the deep, lasting division it created between different religious and ethnic groups. It set the stage for centuries of conflict.
And what about the soldiers who actually made it back home?
They returned as heroes. Their stories, which probably got bigger and bigger with each telling, and the relics they brought back, it all just completely fired up the imagination of medieval Europe. It made the world seem bigger, and it inspired more travel and trade for generations.
So the Siege of Jerusalem was this moment defined by extremes. Extreme faith, extreme hardship, and an extreme human cost.
Exactly. It shows the incredible lengths people will go to for their beliefs, but also the devastating reality of what that kind of conflict costs.
So here's a final thought for you to consider. Given how much of the success really came down to, luck and desperation, was the First Crusade's victory a triumph of military genius, or was it just a complete historical accident fueled by starvation and lucky breaks?
Something to think about.